One of the great mufassirun of our tradition, Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, he actually gave a beautiful summation of the Quran. He said that the Quran, if you want to know, like if you ask somebody, what is the purpose of the Quran? Like, what could we reply? People will come up with different things, but he actually gave a beautiful definition of the Quran. He said that it was da'wat al-khalq ila ibadat al-haq wa dukhuli ila dinihi, right? And so it's calling creation to worship the Creator, meaning humans and jinn, to worship the Creator and to enter into His deen. So he says but that itself, that purpose then demands two things. The first is, what is that ibadah? Like, what are we being called to? And then, what are the incentives for entering into that deen? And he says that also is further divided. He says that the ibadah is two. It's your understanding and it's your practice. So like all things, we have theory and practice. So it's your understanding, it's changing your understanding about the world, about God. This is the metaphysical component in the Quran, which has really, I mean, there's a basic Islam that you need to understand. It's enough of a person if they just come into Islam, and we have a Sahabi that did this, who came into Islam, went into battle, and he died. And so it was enough for him to know the most basic thing about Allah, that there's no God but Allah. La ilaha illallah, right? There's no God but Allah. And at the most fundamental level, Surah Al-Ikhlas, which is one of the extraordinary gifts of this ummah, is Surah Al-Ikhlas, because it takes a very common person, if they have an understanding of that one surah, they really have a theologian's understanding of their Lord. Because the 8 things that it negates, and this is called the via negativa in the West, which is al-lahut al-salbi, like negative theology. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, it negates that He's more than one. Allahu Samad, it negates that He has any need of anything. And then lam yalid wa lam yulad, it negates causation, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is neither caused, nor is He a direct cause of something like a cause and effect relationship to creation. So He doesn't have that relationship of a type of cause and effect, even though we say that He's the cause of the world, but it's not in a cause and effect relationship, and this gets people out of the problem of the eternity of the universe, because the cause is always related to the effect. And then lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, it negates any likeness to God, any nadhir of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's one thing. But what he's saying is that when you go deeper into that, to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah also reveals Himself through the names and through His actions and through, like ta'un is a good example. The Prophet ﷺ was asked about, Aisha radiallahu anha asked him, what is a plague? When a plague comes on, he said it's a adhabullah. It's a punishment from God. And so anything that comes into the world that is foul, it came from the sins of human beings. So a lot of the diseases that we have, that these come originally from sins of human beings. But then we all suffer from the sins of some. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اتقوا فتنة لا تصيبن الذين ظلموا منكم خاصة. Guard yourselves against tribulations that don't just affect the guilty amongst you, they affect everybody. And the Prophet ﷺ says, for instance, that sexual perversions won't manifest in a people except they will be afflicted by diseases that their ancestors didn't know about. And so this puts an onus on people to speak out against these things, because if you don't speak out against them, they proliferate and they affect everybody. So somebody gets a disease through a blood transfusion and they're an innocent person, but they're affected by the source of the disease where it came from, which is sinfulness. This is a metaphysical understanding of these things, and it's difficult for people because a lot of these things are deeply troubling. And they force people to look at themselves instead of looking outside of themselves for the source of the problems. And Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya wrote a beautiful book about this, just showing how all of the problems in the world come from sinfulness of human beings. And obviously you can't, if you see anybody afflicted, you can't judge them and you can't That's another thing. Individual, what happens to individuals? Because like I said, innocent people are afflicted by these things as well. So you withhold your judgment because we're not judges. But we're meant to understand these things at a deep level. So that's one of the things that the Quran teaches. It teaches the nature of the universe that we're in and how it works and what are just as you have physical laws, you have laws of cause and effect. If I hit that, I get a sound, and that can all be explained in physical law. Well, there's also metaphysical laws of cause and effect. Those are difficult to understand. They take a while, but they're embedded in the Quran. They're brought out from the Quran. Many of our scholars have brought them out, but they're brought out from the Quran through study and through understanding of these ayahs. And what's beautiful is that it's consistent. It's not inconsistent. And that's where Allah negates the idea of that they're going to contradict each other. And apparent contradictions in the Quran have all been resolved by our scholars. So he says that all of the meanings of Quran go back to these. One of them is, what is that worship that we're being called to? And then the other is, what are the incentives to enter into that religion? And then, so he says, what we're being called to in terms of worship is Aqidah and ahkam, is what we believe about our Lord, about His acts, His attributes, the world He's created, about the messengers, about our judgment, about the last day, all those things. And then also those legal rulings that we're bound to follow from this religion. The fact that we have to pray, the fact that we have to fast, pay zakat, do these things. But then he gives the incentives for that. And the incentives are two. One is what's called targhib, and the other is tarhib. So targhib is basically what we would call the carrot, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, if you do this, you get a reward, or whoever does this gets this. And the other is the stick, which is that if you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. It's a warning. So this is called wa'ad and wa'id, the promise and the threat. And this is the way most people are motivated. Imam al-Ghazali and others has said at the highest level, the Muslims rise above this, what are called the ahrar, the people that worship Allah, like Suhaib ibn Sinan al-Rumi. It was said of him, whether there was a Jannah or fire or a paradise, he still wouldn't have disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that's the highest level of people that worship Allah because He's worthy of that worship. But then he says that if you go into detail, that you will find that all of the Quranic meanings go back to 7 meanings. All of them go back to 7. And the first one is ilm al-rububiyyah, which is knowledge of our Lord. The second is the nabuwah, which is knowledge of prophets and the messengers who've been sent. And the third is the ma'ad, like eschatology, what happens after we die. And then also the wa'ad and the wa'id, the promises and the threats for disobeying Allah. And then the ahkam, which are the rules that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and the qasas, which are the stories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told. And much of the Quran are stories of the previous people. The most repeated story in the Quran is Pharaoh and Moses, because this is the most repeated human phenomenon, is the relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed. So that's a metaphysical reality, that the world is, by its very nature, you have these problems, these human problems. You have people that oppress other people, that they, ya'lu, Fir'aun exalted himself in the earth. And so they exalt themselves over other people, whether it's through ethnicities, one people thinking they're superior to another people, or gender, where you have men that oppress women, because generally men have more physical strength, and so they very often can have that advantage over women. And so they get into relationships where the woman is oppressed. And there are examples of that in the Quran, like Asya, the wife of Fir'aun, is a good example, where she begged Allah to save her from Fir'aun. And then also wealth. So you have class. And shaitan will use these as ways of dividing people also. And so the story of Fir'aun and Musa has all of these things, because it's first of all, they kill the men and they keep the women. So there's the sexual slavery. And then the ethnicity. You have the Coptics. I mean, they wouldn't call it, but traditionally in the tafsirs they call them Coptic. But you have the Egyptians, and then you have the Israelites. And so they see them as less than them. So there you have the ethnicity. And then you have the wealth. They're poor, and Pharaoh is rich. So right there in there, you have that. And Allah uses the example of, He gives the Fir'aun, inna Fir'aun wa Haman wa junuduhuma. Fir'aun, Haman, and his junud. So there you've got also the military industrial complex. It's all there, right? Because Fir'aun is, he's the government, and then you've got Haman, the intelligence and the brains behind, and then you've got the junud, the military. So you've got the builder, like he's the one, Haman's the builder, like he's the one that is making all the things. And then you've got the military that's supporting them. So it's all there. That story is a very important story in the Quran, because this is the reality of life on earth. And it's been going on for a very, very long time. Musa alayhi salam, you're either Mosaic or you're Pharaonic. It's one or the other. That's the choice. And if you just say, I don't want to be either, well, you've joined Pharaoh, because there's no, silence is complicity. You're complicit by just being silent. But it's one or the other. But then it's how do you behave in that situation? And that story has amazing insights into, because you've got, the Israelite that's fighting with the Egyptian, and then Moses sees him and he defends the oppressed. But then the next day he sees him doing the same thing. He realizes this isn't the way to respond to the oppressor, that this is not. So there's a lot in there to digest.